Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. If you look at everything that has been going on, one could argue this has been a leap year for women's football. Record attendance in stadiums all over the place. Think about FC Barcelona in the Champions League, the Euros, the National Women's Soccer League, and so much more. There's been record-breaking broadcasting deals and investment rounds, landmark partnership and sponsorship deals as well. If you think about it, overall, the women's game is driving in more investment than ever before. The question is, now what? How can these dynamics fuel further growth? This was one of the major questions we asked ourselves when designing the WFS Europe program, and the outcome is this amazing panel we felt obliged to share with you, given the amount of insights and expertise that was shared on it. Claire Bloomfield from the European Club Association, Andrea Ekblad from Dazn, and Samantha Lamberti from Nielsen participate in a panel moderated by Kate Hammer from AxisStars, which was a true masterclass to understand the present and the future of the women's game. They discuss the need for women's football to create mental availability, where the flywheel needs to start to grow the game even further, the partnership frameworks that must emerge, and other dynamics that need to happen in order to professionalize the sport even further. You will not be hearing much from me, but you don't need to. What you need is to enjoy this amazing masterclass that can be of value to any leader in the industry. Let's get to it.
So I think that really illustrates what this whole session is around. Obviously, the women's game is growing. There is more coverage by broadcasters, more fans in stadia, more sponsors getting involved. If I come to you first, Sam, can you help quantify some of that growth from a stats perspective?
The growth is now undeniable, right? We see it, we feel it, and it's everywhere. But what is, for me, more astonishing is the fact that you can feel this through the fans. As a Nielsen Sports, we measure a little bit of everything. And we noticed that for the 2021 season of the Women's Super League in the UK, the live audience had an increase of more than 500% compared to the year before, which is incredible. It's something that we have seen everywhere, though. It's not only when they watch, but it's also how fans engage, and they engage more. We ran an analysis not long ago on the women's football clubs in Italy, which is a market that is less mature than UK in terms of football, right? And we noticed that in the last 2 years, their following and their engagement has grown by 65%, which is incredible. We saw it before. FC Barcelona and the women's team, they have had the top 2 stadium attendance of the entire organization, more than 90,000 people attending the game. But what I think really shows the interest from everyone, and the fact that I think now all the stakeholders in the value chain are ready to invest and they feel that they can do it, is the fact that rights holders, football rights holders, have started unbundling the rights. Before, when you were selling, a men package in terms of sponsorship, somehow women's rights were sunk in there, if you allow me the term. Now they're unbundled, and this has generated a growth in investment. The investment that we have seen after the pandemic is 3 times bigger than what it was before the pandemic in 2019. So I think these numbers really show the fact that something is moving. And at the heart of this, for me, there is always funds as well, and what they are demanding, and the fact that they want to see now women playing in the right way.
Absolutely. And presumably those sort of stats were things that influenced the decisions at Dazn to invest in the Champions League. Andrea, do you want to tell us a bit about the journey to that?
Yes, I mean, I believe that this is the most dynamic period ever for professional women's football, and it's happening now, and also now it's unstoppable. And there are a number of key factors driving that. I'm very proud that Dazn is one of those who are driving some meaningful change in this space. And when we talk about those key factors driving it, like back to what you said as well, it's the unbundling what has been previously sold together with youth competitions or men's competitions, to more leagues are getting into professional status, for the games are moving to bigger stadiums, and it's a lot of ripple effects as well as reasons how we got to this point. And obviously broadcasters' investment is absolutely key into this. The reason we believe that when we invested into the UEFA Women's Champions League now almost 2 years ago was that with the right amount of investment and with the right amount of promotion and marketing put behind it, and with the coverage that we give all around the competitions, and to solve that decades-long fragmentation, so to give easier access for fans to watch the best of women's football, it can begin to compete with men's competitions, and it also makes great global proposition for us as a business. So actually, fast forward less than a year later, we actually further doubled down our investment, and I'm very happy to talk about it here in Spain, that we became the home of the newly formed women's professional league, Liga F, as well. You know, in Spain we had the men's football, but even better, now we have the women's as well, and we're very excited about that.
Claire, from an ECA perspective, you obviously launched the first strategy for the women's game back in 2020, and that's going from strength to strength. I understand there's the new joint venture with UEFA. I'm not sure how much you can tell us about that, but I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is a hugely exciting and successful ongoing media rights sales process happening right now. So that's focused around the men's UEFA club competitions post-2024. But I certainly hope that in the not too distant future, we're sat here again talking about the success of the media rights sales process also being run by the joint venture for the cycle post-2025. But if I can actually just get back to the points that Andrea was making, I think it's important to note that we need the broadcasters, we need the media rights holders to truly understand women's football, and also understand how to connect with their fans and how the fans connect with the product. And from the outset, it was very clear that Dazn were here for the long haul. This was a project that we're hugely passionate about. And actually, the collaboration between ECA and Dazn from those early days was hugely significant. And it's allowed us to make sure that the clubs are truly bought into to this deal and the potential that it has. Because we have to accept that as clubs, we also have a responsibility to make this deal a success.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned in there collaboration is super key for the growth of this game, and the stakeholders that are involved up until this point have obviously collaborated really well. It's now broadening out much further. There's new sponsors coming in, new broadcasters and stuff. From each of your perspectives, what are the sort of key learnings in your area that additional, for example, broadcasters now coming in, like what do they need to do? It's not just about kind of buying the rights, is it? What's the sort of responsibility they've got to help grow the game?
Yes, I mean, from a broadcaster perspective and a platform perspective, there are a number of ways in which we can empower the growth of the game. First of all, to give it coverage. And I don't just talk about the 90 minutes and then we show the live game, but it's everything else around the game. We're talking about women's football, where it's been decades and decades of lack of visibility and lack of coverage. So it's also about educating new fans who come on board. What's the history of the competitions? Who are the key players? but also to bring in a younger audience, so a lot of lifestyle, as well as the compilations. So to serve the most loyal fans to the very new ones as well. And we put quite significant investment into creating all those additional content as well, with weekly shows, or we did a We Are Right City series in the first season of the UEFA Women's Champions League, where we wanted to showcase the football fandom of women's football in some of those key cities like Madrid and Munich and Turin. And we also invested into the first ever documentary series, the One Team, One Dream, This is Chelsea, which was really one of its kind, and they're all factors to grow the game. So to give that all around non-stop coverage, again, rather than just sporadic around the competition, but an all year long comms and news pieces to come out as well as to solve that fragmentation and lack of access, which we had for many, many years, so that fans don't have to scramble through social media channels and to see, where can I watch Chelsea's Women's Champions League game, or where can I watch Barcelona?
That is exactly the point, right? Giving access.
Yes, and that consistency.
Yes.
And that I know that if I show up to the Dazn YouTube channel or Dazn platform, that I will get my women's football fix in these leagues, wherever I am in the world. So I believe those are all our responsibilities. And again, from a more broader societal perspective as well, to inspire the next generation, and so that a little girl can, once they watched the game and some putellas dribble, then they can pick up the ball, go outside and practice, because boys could do that like for decades and decades and decades, and now young girls can do that. And so I think those are like the key responsibilities from a broadcast perspective.
And if I just can add just one point to what Andrea said, the accessibility and the availability of content is very important, and not only for women's sport, but for everything, right? It's about building a story around what the sport is, and in this case, it's for women. I always like to make this example that doesn't have anything to do with women's football, but if we look at Drive to Survive, made by Formula One, right? That is an example. It's an established sport that is somehow losing funds, right, for a reason or another, because people couldn't understand the sport or couldn't understand what was behind there. But then everything changed when they made the content available to people that could understand more. And that's the same thing that we have to do with women's football. I think it's everyone's responsibility to give this access and create mental availability, right? What do I watch today? Men's football, Formula One, and women's football, right? Has to be in the funds. And I think it's there. I can talk about stats all day long, but fans want to see more of this. They're open to, not leave behind what's traditional, but open to new things, or giving the right to be to sport like women's football.
I think the Dazn partnership has also been so successful to date is because that digital first behavior, that mentality of the supporters was already there. It's only in the sort of last 12 months or so, it's become the norm to be able to turn on your TV and see a live women's football match. Typically, historically, many of us here, I'm sure, were used to scouring the internet, desperate to find a way to tune into the game. And Dazn have made that possible now by being able to watch it either embedded on a club platform or on the Dazn platform or YouTube. So I think this is another reason why this partnership has worked in the way that it has. And what's been great is, as Andrea mentioned, is the storytelling that has packaged these live games. And I'm sure it's something Andrea can talk about in more detail, but we worked with the clubs to encourage them to let down their guard a little bit, provide some more access, And it meant that we saw, for example, a coach at Wolfsburg being mic'd up during a warm-up and was giving that comment and analysis. So this is kind of another space in which women's football can really innovate and we can lead. So it's been fantastic to see.
Great. And how important are the players themselves for this growth? You know, particularly if we're talking about the storytelling and the kind of background to the game and stuff. I don't know, Sam, if you've got any sort of insight in terms of social media and the way key players are growing the game.
Yeah, so I do. I like to take a step back on this one because players are really important, right? In any sport, women, men, anything is at the heart of it. We run a research globally, which is called Nielsen Fun Insights, and we found out just last year that actually 70% of the global, more than 70% of the global population believe that women can be role model, right? And if you only look, forget about women and men, forget about anything, athletes are influencers, okay? Through our stats, we know they actually have a power that is twice bigger than general influencers, so they can inspire people. If you put these two things together, you realize how important is the role of women. We have analyzed, the social media following of a big global number of women's football players. And their following in the last year has grown by 37%. And they managed to reach 10 million followers altogether, which is pretty big target for them. But what is more interesting to me is the fact that when we compare these female football players with male football players, the engagement rate actually is the same. It's 7% for women and 8% for men. But the sponsorship investments in there, for example, are, I don't even want to say, like, they're not comparable, right? Yeah. So it means that there is a power there for women football players to be there, right? And the more we can not promote them, but help them show what they do, the power, the struggle, the commitment to the game and to the sport that they have, the more they will inspire and they will help the game grow.
No, definitely. And I think it's interesting as well, obviously, the more the game is growing, there's more different levels of the game that are available then for sponsors of all sizes to be getting involved and investing, however small or big their marketing budgets are. I suppose that then brings us on to the question of how do we make sure that we're looking at the whole infrastructure of the game and, it's not just sort of cash coming in, but there is advice about how best should that be spent, for example, by the clubs. Claire, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. We need to be thinking about several aspects of competition and the kind of commercial strategy that sits around that. Whilst getting the commercial strategy right is crucial, driving the growth, professionalization of the game itself is also key. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. And the ECA strategy kind of sets out 6 distinct strategic goals that we're following to try and uplift the game in multiple ways simultaneously. But I think it's also important that we're thinking about when that money comes into the clubs, how is it spent in a way which is in a kind of financially sustainable approach that we can perhaps steer, whether it's through club licensing or sometimes through education, that we're focusing on things like elite environments. If we're increasing the performance and the quality of play, ultimately that then generates more interest from supporters, more passionate supporters. Broadcasters, sponsors also want to join the party, if you like, and they want to be part of that. So it's very much a cycle, and it is about all of the stakeholders working together. And on a personal note, that's one of the reasons why I love working in women's football so much, is because there is this genuine willingness to work together. And even though sometimes you might sit on opposite sides of the table and might not necessarily always agree, there is a real willingness to work towards this end goal that we all share.
Yeah, well, everyone benefits if they collaborate, don't they? So it's definitely the right thing to do. What should we be expecting from sponsors in terms of their responsibility to the game, especially people that are maybe seeing an opportunity now that it's a growth game and they want to get involved? How do we make sure that people aren't just sort of trying to jump on the bandwagon to make a quick buck, but are actually going to support the growth of the game?
I think that's a really important point. For many years, the game relied on pioneers like David Dean at Arsenal, Jean-Michel Aulas, ETA board member, the chair of our executive committee, and obviously president of Olympique Lyonnais, because of this visionary approach that they had. Obviously, Arsenal is an example where you can buy sponsorship with the club, with the women's team, even if you haven't had a prior relationship with the men's team. And I think this is kind of a testament to the confidence and the maturity of this sort of market for women's football sponsorship. But I do think it's important that at this point we give a nod to those who have very much led the way.
And Sam, when you're sort of advising sponsors and looking at potential opportunities for them, what sort of advice do you give to them about getting involved in the game?
Yeah, well, the approach we take is the one I said at the beginning all the time, right? Which is look at the funds, understand what the funds are looking for. In the UK, you have like 54% of the population that wants to stand for social causes, equal opportunities. And this same amount of people actually are more willing to buy a product from a brand that stands for the same rights and for the same social causes. And this is where the opportunity comes from. And this is at the top of the agenda of any sponsor anyway, any brands. And they do see, I can tell from what we see when we talk to them, right, that we do see the brands investing in women's football or women's sport, not because it's easy, not because they have to fill a gap, but because they're trying to create a strategy around it and collaborate with the rights holders to create this strategy. I think there is a need, the benefit is mutual, right, between the sponsors and the rights holders. And I think the main thing is to understand where the best pair between the two is, because ultimately, while the brand is interested in getting the women football content, right, or sponsoring this property because it's aligned with their values, it's aligned with their strategy, at the same time, they can give back know-how to the rights holder to help create this content, right? And I think this is their responsibility as a sponsor, is like making sure that the way they use the content and the content they create using, you know, the women football property is the right one and gives the right message and follows what fans want to, which is, you know, standing for things that we were not standing before and seeing women playing, you know, as professional as women do, men do. So I think that's what we advise around, and that's where we start from all the time. Let's start from the fans and what they want. So how you build a story around that.
Yeah.
I'll probably, first of all, the changes that we're seeing are huge. Just to think about, again, going back to the personal level, where going with my daughter to the supermarket and then seeing, I don't know, England players on a crisp packet or on soft drinks covers, like, you know, this has never happened before. And it's brilliant to see and breaking into that mainstream, or seeing Leah Williamson on the billboard and so forth. Seeing now Sam Kerr on the cover of the new EA game as well. These are huge milestones. And I would probably see brands in two categories. One of them is the more, say, pioneer brands who invested, even though there was a huge risk factor to it, but they've taken that risk nevertheless. And now those brands are synonymous with women's football. And the others are perhaps keeping it more safe and have waited and waited until it's proven its success. And we're in that stage now.
Yeah.
And I expect a lot more brands investing into the women's game now, because truly it's not an opportunity to pass on. So, I mean, our doors are open as well to discuss, so just let us know. We're all here to grow the game.
And this is not even just limited to Europe. I think we often draw quite interesting comparisons between the NWSL and the big clubs in Europe, the big leagues in Europe. Naturally, obviously, given the organisation I represent, we want women's club football. We want Europe to be the powerhouse of women's club football. But I think there are important learnings we can take when we look across to some of the models in the United States, particularly with some of the newcomers, thinking San Diego Wave, Angel City, both taken very different approaches. From what I understand, Angel City were going for something like $3 million in sponsorship. Mm-hmm. They reached over 11, if the media reports are accurate. And I think that's staggering. It shows the growth, the excitement, the opportunity in a largely untapped market still. And this is the time to get on board. I think it's really important that we're having conversations like this. We're provided with this sort of forum and opportunity to push these messages. Because if you don't get on board now, it's too late.
So you mentioned obviously learning stuff from the US. What about other women's sports? What are there key ones that we can kind of learn from or collaborate with potentially?
Yeah, I think we can actually collaborate and learn from other women's sports, not just from a commercial perspective. So I can think of various regulatory challenges that we've looked to address, and we've reached out to, the Women's NBA, we've reached out to Cricket Australia, we've reached out to organizations all around the world to understand how they're tackling some of these challenges, given that many of us are actually facing very similar challenges. So it is helpful that there is, again, this willingness for women's sports organizations to share this knowledge. So whether it's something in high performance research or, like I said, the sort of more regulatory framework topics, there is certainly things we can take from them all.
I would love to add to that, to what Claire said as well, that I think there's also, it's more women's football is now paving the way to many other perhaps women's sports or other sports as well. We have looked at tennis previously, as that was the sort of the one to aspire to, but how many other sports could you name that after its peak moment, which was 2019 Women's World Cup, endure such a big, massive disruption that the COVID and that whole period of time was, and yet come back and bounce back even stronger? So it really shows that enduring nature of it and the growth potential. And I think that's something to really hold on to, and also goes to the fact that we're just scratching the surface. Like, this is only just the very beginning of it. And like, imagine having all those games now in big stadiums, because right now it's only, we see where it can be and it's proven, but I'm really excited about the next
where it can go.
Phase, yes, in the next few years.
I really don't think it's long before we see stakeholders on the men's side starting to look at what's happening in women's football and think, well, hang on a minute, maybe we can do it the way that they've done it. I appreciate it's a hugely successful industry. It's an industry in its own right. But we, as I said, have some flexibility and new space to innovate. And actually, perhaps we can lead the way. We talk often about not just copy and pasting how things have been done in men's football, but we will innovate in a way that works for our objectives for women's football. But I really don't think it will be too long before, as I say, we're seeing men's stakeholders jump in and follow our lead.
And are you seeing much collaboration with the men's game, like proactively coming from the men's game to liaise with you on different things, or do you think there's still big scope to do that?
I think it's a really interesting one because we obviously have clubs with very different realities across Europe. We have those who are very much integrated with a men's club and then those standalone women's clubs. But we talk a lot about the importance of having these key leaders in football voicing their support for women's football, but then also showing it by backing the game financially long term. We had a General Assembly last week in Istanbul. Our ECA chairman, Nasser Al-Khalifi, stood there in his opening address and said, let's be realistic, women's football needs major investment. And it's so powerful to have these influential figures in football give these messages, because that's exactly what we need to be telling the clubs around Europe. Let's be bold, let's be big with our ambitions. Let's stop talking about the potential and actually get on with it.
Yeah.
We as Dazn are feeling quite confident about implementing a strategy around the Women's Champions League, and we've now a season down, we see that it's working, and we're using that as across the business on not just women's sports, but perhaps other sports as well, on how to grow, and that's a transferable approach, and that's exactly what we're doing now with Liga F, for example, as well, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I suppose it is that, like you were saying earlier, Claire, it's kind of been digital first, potentially, in the women's game. So there's still quite a lot of learnings that you can take into men's sport from that, where those things are perhaps not happening currently. So final question then. Obviously, we want to keep this growth going. We want to go from strength to strength. So for each of your different areas, what is the key focus to keep this growth going? I'll start with you, Andrea.
I think it's really important not to dial back now on the investment, on the coverage, on the accessibility, to keep it going and keep it growing.
Well, for me, I go back to the investment point, right? You do need monetary investment. And definitely one way to get this investment is through the commercial relationships between rights holder brands, because they learn from each other. I talked at the beginning about initiating a new sponsorship model, which is unbundling the rights. I think is giving the right return. Actually, we have calculated based on the data that we have that rights holder can increase commercial revenues by 10% unbundling the rights, and this is in the current situation with none of the actions that you were talking about to put in place, right? So the potential is even bigger. And commercially, there is an untapped opportunity here. You have more than 50%, 45% of the UK population, I think, follows men's football and generates more than 300 million viewers for the English Premier League. But you have 70% of the same population following women's football, generating 11 million viewership of the Women's Super League, right? So when you see the difference, you understand why the same people cannot keep watching women's football, right? It's just giving to them access and giving to them availability. So for me, strengthening this relationship between the stakeholders even more, and having stakeholders like Dazn, giving the access that people need and the consistency around it.
We certainly have a responsibility to evaluate every possible proposition to develop the club competition landscape. This is huge. Not only does it provide the clubs the opportunity to play more relevant games in Europe and can also be used as a development tool, but we also provide more access to supporters to be able to jump in, get involved in the game, watch the game, attract broadcasters like Dazn to partner with a wider spectrum of competitions. We've talked about a lot. I mean, many people in this room will be familiar with the various debates about competition formats of the European club competitions. We still need to keep tweaking this to get it right. Obviously, the remodeling of the Women's Champions League from 2021 to 25 has brought significant change, significant improvements. But we shouldn't be satisfied with where we are now. We have to continue to push and, as I said, be ambitious. And that's like a core part of our women's football strategy, is looking at ways to further develop the competition landscape.
And is that also sort of building out squads as well? Because if there's going to be more games to be playing, they potentially want to do that. And I think you're doing some work, aren't you, in terms of like a youth development pathway and performance?
That's right. Yeah, we're about to start a piece of work which looks at analysing how young players, young female players, are developed, how they're recruited, what sort of care they have, both sort of the parental support that is available, but also, you know, how are players being treated when they arrive? How are they prepared for this kind of level of stardom, which is also about to kind of take off now? It's very new for many of them, but also looking how do we prepare them for this increased physicality and intensity of the game that we're seeing, and it's obviously only going one way. And sort of in line with that, we have a women's high performance advisory group. So it's club doctors, physios, sports scientists, you name it, they come together, and we're working actively on 2 huge research projects. One I would love to be able to talk to you about right now, but I can't. But it truly has the power to transform women's football globally. And trying to address this gap in medical research is another big project at ECA and with significant investment. But we obviously have a huge responsibility if we're increasing the number and the level of competitions, that make sure we have the science, the knowledge, the understanding to be able to adapt training and injury rehabilitation at the same time.
And I suppose that also offers more opportunities to sponsors, actually, in terms of they're getting involved in something at a deeper level, again, not just branding something, but they could be part of something that would be relevant for all women as well, probably a lot of the output that comes from that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I wanted to add to that as well, that it's all those ripple effects and all those changes that are happening simultaneously in all levels and areas, and more leagues getting professional status and more broadcast deals and more brands getting involved. And that drives to this exponential growth that is happening right now in women's football.
Absolutely. Anybody got any final words? Anything we've missed?
Go out there and back your women's team.
Great. Well, I hope everybody is very excited about the potential even bigger growth of women's football. And obviously, you've got 3 experts here. If anybody wants to speak to them during the next couple of days, they're around. So thank you very much.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks.
And there you have them. Claire, Andrea, Samantha, and Kate giving a true masterclass on where women's football is headed. Personally, I could not agree more with a key idea that Claire shared towards the end of the conversation, which is that this is the time to keep pushing with the momentum that has been created. It is definitely not the time to stop. At World Football Summit, we will continue to support the growth of women's football by bringing you more experts, panel, and resources you can learn from for that to happen. Before we go, remember, you can subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform of your choice and reach out on social media with any feedback. And we are a little over 1 month away from our first ever World Football Summit event in Africa. On November 16th and 17th, the football industry will gather in Durban, South Africa. If you want to be part of the collective that will help shape the future of the African football industry and become an instrumental player on the global football scene, make sure you head over to our website and buy your ticket right now. We really hope to see you there. Nothing else from my side. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the World Football Summit podcast. And until next time, have a great rest of your day.